Welcome back to ED Extra here on the ground in New York for Climate Week NYC. We've moved across to the Nest Climate Campus, one of several events happening, hundreds of events happening across the few days here throughout this week. I'm delighted to be joined by a speaker fresh off stage in the form of Claire Perry-O'Neill, who many of us will know as the former Minister of State for Energy and Clean Growth and currently the co-chair of the Global Imperatives Advisory Board for the WBCSD. Claire, thanks so much for joining us so quickly off stage. Talk to us a little bit about that session you've just been sat in.
So this was a session that was really focusing on sort of climate data measurement. So I was on with the CEO of CDP, who many of us know, the new CEO, and a company based in Singapore called Terrascope, who provide climate data engines and decision-making tools for corporate customers, particularly in the food and nature supply chains. And I'm an advisor to them for transparency. And we had a very kind of discussion, a big discussion that went from kind of broad, where are we, down to what are the data metrics and tools that we need. And my takeaway was, of course we need data, of course we need transparency, but we have to use it. And you've heard me talk before about the fact that we're kind of miles behind where we need to be. I think we have to confront some of the difficulties of the transition, and actually having data that supports those decision-making tools is really helpful. That's sort of the holy grail. And by the way, we're getting there.
Well, that leads on to my next question, because I wanted to get a sense for your mood around this event. It's kind of, depending on what session you sit in, you get a bit of anger, you get frustration, you get some optimism. Where do you sit on that?
Right in the session before us, which so I, as you know, am a congenital optimist. But I like to come to Climate Week because it's so diverse. COP tends to be very focused on the COP conversation. This is, I think, a more diverse gathering, and it's a great way of kind of testing to see what's hot, what's not, if you like. And what's hot, I think, is an impatience for real action, for a much more precision when we use terms. When we talk about financing the transition, for example, we have never been explicit enough about why projects, particularly in the developing South, are not getting the financing that they need. And so you have new institutions like Altera, which was set up at COP28, which is bringing together some of the world's best financiers, exclusively focused on projects in the developing South, and in many cases focused primarily on energy, which is what we need. So there's a real sense of kind of reality, I think. But there's also, a worry that because we are so off track with our decarbonisation pathways, and we have climate and weather events that are causing great difficulty for many, that we've just got to move, we've got to try things, we've got to take risks, we've got to be prepared to fail. We're very bad at accepting failure in this space, and this was always a problem in government. You never could do something and have it go wrong because you were so criticised. We have to be, as with COVID, we have to be prepared to put some big bets and to fail and learn from that process.
Yeah, and I want to kind of bring that now into a UK context then, and we'll perhaps go back to global in a moment when we talk about the upcoming COPs. But from a UK perspective, obviously we're sitting with a new Labour government. We've had a few months now of them at the reins. What's your take on that, and what are you kind of hoping to see from this government over the next 6-12 months? So
I think they've set out, I think Ed has set out a really ambitious agenda, and I've told him I don't think we can deliver it. Truthfully, I don't think we can have a zero emissions energy system by 2030. But I think he's absolutely right to set that ambition, because it's completely changed the conversation with investors. And Chris Stark is a great appointment. We all love Chris. He's a great mission leader. And what I also detect from the other parts of government, because you'll know this transition is a whole of government process, is when they speak to investors, when they speak to operators, there's a reality check, there's a view, we haven't got tons of money, but what can we do to help you accelerate? What are the planning restrictions that need to go? How do we deal with permitting? How do we deal with joining innovation and investment? So I think that it's fantastic that this is at the heart of the government mission set, and that they are working really hard without writing big checks to figure out how to do it. And that's admirable. And truthfully, when I was in office, it was really important to me to build cross-party consensus for everything, because all of our policies and plans, if they're done correctly, should outlive multiple governments. What was a bit depressing once I departed politics in 2019 was how it got kind of weaponized politically, because we're not going to make progress if we're throwing lumps at each other over the dispatch boxes. So I hope, when the opposition has sorted themselves out, we can get back to that slightly more long-term focused, consensus-driven decision making, because we need it, right? And the UK has led in so many places, both globally and and in Europe, and we can get back to being one of those real leading economies.
I wanted to come back to your point there about the targets and whether or not we can achieve them. There's this sort of balance between being a pragmatist and being almost a solutionist. And if we were to be a solutionist for a moment, what would you really like to see that you think could make those targets possible?
We should be investing in long duration storage very heavily, because we all know that we can build renewables cheaply at point source of delivery. You can't run a grid off renewables. You're going to have carbon capture associated with gas, and that's also now starting to be deliverable. But we have to solve the storage conundrum, and 2-hour, 4-hour diurnal storage is good. We need, I think, monthly seasonal storage. And again, a lot of these solutions are lab scale. We've got to scale them up, and the UK could do that. As we led on so many other technological areas, we could really put some bunts and some thinking into that long duration storage, and then you get a much better shot at really doing this decarb agenda.
Right, I'll touch on global quickly with the fact that we're sat on the cusp of two more mega events, 2 COPs. So we've got COP16, COP29. What for you marks a sort of successful next 3-4 months?
Well, it's a busy end of the year, so I think it's actually really great that COP16 has got some vigour, because I had kind of given up on the nature COP track, truthfully, before Montreal, because it just was going nowhere. And actually, I would like to see those 2 COP tracks come together, personally. I think there's no reason they couldn't, but I think it's great to see that. And I think that's a runway for the Brazilian COP, where they've been talking this week about putting prices on nature, really being very clear about the value of nature across all of the agendas. So there'll be conversations about that. COP29, I'll be in Baku, I don't know if you'll be. They'll talk a lot about financing, but what they will do, and this is where I think it's so important, is they will continue to develop things that came out of COP28. COP has a horrible habit of being all singing or dancing, and then the caravan packs up and moves off, and stuff is just about how many initiatives have we seen, right? Starting with Mission Possible, all good stuff that gets discarded. Actually, what really matters is continuity and scale around some of the initiatives. I think we've announced as many initiatives as we need. We've got huge focus on methane reduction, on finance activation, on a new set of NDCs that are a little more pragmatic. We just need to keep doubling down on them at every COP.
Yeah, well, it's a very optimistic note to end on, and I think that's a really nice note to end on as we close off this episode of ED Extra. So thank you very much, Claire, for joining us. I'm sure we'll probably bump into each other at more events here, and stay tuned for further episodes of ED Extra.